What evil deity will enslave the human race come the eclipse? I think that's probably the god Kek. That would be my guess, as far as I've been able to tell so forth. Could you please tell the difference between equity and equality, and why is equity dangerous? Well, it's not actually equity and equality. It's equity and equality of opportunity. Well, you know, it's a truism, I think, that's agreed upon by liberals and conservatives alike, that the interests of individuals and society are best served by opening the door to the participation of all who are qualified, regardless of their attributes in domains that have nothing to do with the qualifications for the position. So imagine that as a worker, and that would include managers, executives, etc. As a worker, you have a function like a tool. You're a tool. And I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't be too down on that. It's good to be good for something. And it's in society's best interest that those who are able to be the most efficient tools are the ones that are placed in the position. And so you want to open up the competitive landscape to all players, not least so that society can most effectively exploit the people who are most productive. Now, it also has the side benefit of allowing individuals to utilize their talents and to take their place in the social world. But people are very diverse in their abilities, like incredibly diverse in their abilities. And that's mostly evident, for example, in the domain of intelligence, you know, because, well, the range that includes the majority of people runs from an IQ of about 85, or let's say 70, to an IQ of 130. Although there's plenty of people who are outside those domains. It's like at 70, you're pretty intellectually impaired, right? You're not going to graduate from high school with an IQ of 70, except under very, very extreme circumstances. With an IQ of 83, which is about 10% of the population, 85 is 15%, you're going to have a hard time reading well enough to follow instructions. You know, and with an IQ of 115, you're going to do pretty well at a sort of mid-level community college. And so an IQ of 145 is going to prepare you for like high success in complex domains, say like law or managerial positions where the environment is transforming very radically. There is immense differences between people in their cognitive ability, and so, and in their conscientiousness, and in their negative emotionality, and, you know, and in their energy levels, and in their creativity, and all sorts of traits. And because of that individual diversity, there's no reason to assume that there is going to be equality of outcome. And that's what equity is. I've got to change the battery in my camera. And we're back. Apologies for that. With this DSLR, whichever it is, there's some, I won't go into it. I have to change the battery after about an hour or so. Anyways, back to intelligence. What was I saying? Talking about individual differences and the differences in intelligence. Oh yeah, equality of outcome. Well, the only way, given the wide range of human capacity, first, you don't want to organize your society such that every single category of outcome has exactly proportional representation from every single possible category of person, because that isn't, you have to use so much social force in order to make that occur that the consequences, the negative consequences, will far outweigh the benefits. It's better to open up the marketplace to allow a very large range of hierarchies to emerge, and then to let people compete for their position, to compete and cooperate for their own positions. And the other problem with equity is, like, who the hell is going to make who's going to decide which groups are going to be categorized? Here's an example for you. Let's imagine you stratified the population by IQ, which we do, by the way, although we don't do it as evidently and obviously as we do, say, by sex, or perhaps even by race. Would you actually recommend that an equal number of people be drawn from every category of IQ to be surgeons? I mean, that's palpably absurd. So there's too much social engineering required to produce equity of outcome. Now, having said that as well, the historical data on equity are absolutely clear. The societies that have tried to aim at equity are the terrible communistic societies of the 20th century, and they were so goddamn so unbelievably murderous and counterproductive that it beggars the imagination. And so I can't even believe we have a conversation about equity, because it's such a pathological idea. It's completely invalidated by the historical data. So, all right. What does my average daily schedule consist of? Well, that's fairly straightforward. I get up around somewhere between 6 and 8, and then I work till 10, as hard as I can, flat out, every single day. So, and I've been doing that with very little variation, although it's been much more extreme in the last year, since 1985. Like, I work probably, I would say 14 hours a day. At least 14 hours a day, and so that's about 100 hours a week. And the time that I don't do that, I spend with friends, but mostly with my family. And so yeah, and I work as efficiently as I possibly can. I'm always trying to do everything I can as fast as I possibly can, and I'm accustomed to that because, like I said, I've been doing it for 30 years. So that's my daily schedule, and I don't know even what I would do if I didn't do that. I have this cottage that I go to, although I generally spend time writing up there, and I go swimming with my wife, and we go canoeing, and I can take a break in that way. But most of the time, if I take a break even up at the cottage, generally what I do is like carpentry and fix the place up, and I don't like to be unoccupied. I have to be occupied doing something productive all the time, because otherwise I'm not pleased with myself. And so, and you know, I decided a long time ago that I was going to try to live a hyper-efficient and hyper-productive life. And so it's been a challenge. It's an enjoyable thing for me to some degree, because I'm very interested in trying to figure out how much I can possibly do in the shortest period of time all the time. And that keeps you alert and awake. And it's a great challenge, and it lends my life a substantial amount of meaning, and it's been very successful. So, you know, so that's kind of what it's like. Okay, let's see what else these chat people say. Oh, wow. Apparently, broken mind. In Tolstoy's Confession, he talks about meaning in faith. He had many problems with religion and the church. How can a non-religious person find a meaningful non-religious faith? Oh, well, you know, it depends on what you mean by non-religious. You know, I would say, for broken mind, you know, I was thinking about this today. I was writing about this today. I was writing about Dostoevsky as compared to Nietzsche. You know, and Nietzsche was a great critic of Christianity, and so was Dostoevsky. But Dostoevsky, I think, trumped Nietzsche with regards to his attitude towards Christianity. And I think you could really see this. You could read the Brothers Karamazov. I would really recommend that. Broken Mind, everything. Get your hands on Dostoevsky. Read everything you can he wrote. Because Dostoevsky really, and you like Tolstoy's Confession, you know, read Dostoevsky. But, you know, Dostoevsky has this character in the Brothers Karamazov, Alyosha. And Alyosha is a monastic novitiate, and who's kind of a naive guy intellectually, although a very good person. A simple person intellectually, let's say, perhaps not naive. And he has this older brother, Ivan, who's a devastating intellect and a handsome man and a rake with the women and like really a well put together human being, although quite nihilistic and cutting in his intellect. And Ivan can absolutely demolish Alyosha in a debate, and does quite regularly. But Alyosha basically wins the argument in the book, let's say, as the book plays itself out, by acting like a good person. And I would say, you know, if you want to develop a religious faith, in some sense, forget about trying to develop faith in God. I don't think you can will yourself into that. I'm not even sure that you should. But I do think that you can decide that you are going to do what you can to live a meaningful life and be a good person, and start to meditate on what that means, and then to start to put it in practice. And then you find your religious faith in the domain of action rather than conceptualization. And that's really the primary domain in which it should be manifested anyways. Like the primary Christian commitment, for example, is the imitation of Christ, not the belief in his divinity, you know, or the belief that he died for the sins of mankind or any of that. And I'm not making light of that. But the primary moral injunction is to try to live the archetypal life within the confines of your own subjective being, to try to live the most divine life that you can. And if you try that, and if you take that seriously, and if you meditate upon that and ask yourself what it might mean, then I think you'll find the religious element of your life fleshing itself out quite nicely. So that's the answer to that question. Thoughts on the drug epidemic? Well, I'm not sure there is an epidemic any more than there always has been. I know that there is now a tilt towards drugs in the US in particular, like meth and fentanyl and the other opiates, and that's quite a catastrophe. A lot of that is occurring among people who don't have meaning in their lives, I would say. And you might think that's a facile answer, but it's not. You know, like here's the rat literature. Like, it's, if you take a rat, lab rat, typical lab rat is, you know, genetically bred to be identical with many other lab rats, and he lives alone in a cage, and he's got a pretty miserable rat life, because rats are social animals and they don't like to live in cages by themselves. And you can get a lab rat in a cage addicted to cocaine in no time flat, and he'll like press a lever for cocaine reward, pretty much to the exclusion of all else, including sex and often including food. But if you take that same rat and you put him in a rat family, you know, in a rat social hierarchy, in a rat environment, and give him something that rat like to do so that he can be satisfied, it's very difficult to get him addicted to cocaine. And so I would say the reason that people take psychomotor stimulants, and all the drugs of serious abuse are psychomotor stimulants, regardless of what else they might be, they activate the dopaminergic system, which is the system that tracks reward and that is associated, that's activated when you pursue valuable goal-directed behavior. If you don't have that, if you don't have a valid goal, if you don't have, and so no real valid meaning in your life, if you don't have a valid ambition, then you don't have any way of activating that system. And why the hell wouldn't you take drugs? It's like you have to have something better to do to not addict yourself, you know. So I would say that a huge part of the current epidemic in the US in particular is manifest among broken men who have no real place in society, and providing them with money isn't going to help that. They need a productive and meaningful existence, and which is the paramount goal, should be the paramount goal of social policy, for example. It isn't the alleviation of poverty that's really the issue, because people in the West aren't poor. There might be a bit of a distribution problem, but we're not poor. What we have is what would you say, we have a problem of meaningful engagement, and that's what has to be addressed, and that's why I do the work that I'm doing. So, are you aware of the similarities in the work of Anthony Robbins and with a lot of what you are doing in the self-authoring suite? I'm not specifically aware of the similarities, although I know that Anthony Robbins is a well-known motivational speaker, and generally motivational speakers try to motivate people to pursue something productive in their life. So, you know, I would say likely that there are people who are concerned with motivation that are working at different levels of the communication strata, and I'm working at a fairly abstract level, and hopefully Mr. Robbins is working at a level that is productive and helpful to lots of people. He certainly had a very stable and long career. So, although I'm not aware of any specific similarities past that. So, what do you think about ADHD? I have it. I am frustrated by my failures in life. Because of it, I am trying to become a chemist, and I am failing at school. I think ADHD is a catch-all diagnosis. I think that people who are extroverted and unconscientious, for example, often manifest the traits of attention deficit disorder. I know that there isn't any real evidence of long-term utility in psychopharmacological treatment for ADHD. I would say, though, if you are having a hard time concentrating on your goals, that what you should probably do is set yourself up with a therapist. Find someone you can talk to, you know, so see 2 or 3 therapists. I know it's expensive, but so is not having a life. Find someone you can talk to, and then make it, and someone practical, probably a behavioral therapist would be best, and then have them set goals with you and help you strategize to stay on track week to week. That's the best thing, or to set that up with a friend if you can't do it with the therapist. So that's the best advice I have for that. And keep at it, man, you know, but you got to learn to schedule, you got to learn to break your days down into disciplined subsections, and you got to practice at it and practice at it. And there isn't an easier answer that I know of, but having someone that will help keep you responsible, I think, can be useful. I've seen that be useful for people who have attention deficit disorder, let's say. You once compared religion and science as tools that can be used more accurately to understand your position. Do you think gender and biological sex are 2 tools in describing an identity? Not really. I think most of the work on gender is rubbish, to put it bluntly. I get what is meant by it, you know, that there is a socio-cultural layer specifying gendered behavior on top of biological sexual identity, but I think it's been so polluted by political idiocy that it's a concept that's almost entirely invalidated. It's used for perverse purposes. It's not used as a tool of understanding in most situations. So I think that the concept of gender could be useful if it was used to specify the purely socio-cultural layer of like sex type behavior, and I think it could conceivably be used in that way, but I see very little evidence that it ever is. So my brother is a soldier in Iraq. As a clinical psychologist, what should one do when coming from such a chaotic place back to a tame and structured one? Well, I guess that would depend to some degree on exactly the nature of his experiences in Iraq. So it's hard for me to elaborate on that further. I mean, I would say, though, that one thing he could really do, and this is somewhat self-serving, or could appear to be somewhat self-serving, I suppose, is I would strongly recommend that your brother do the self-authoring suite when he comes back, because it'll help him, and probably concentrate on the future authoring program to begin with, because it might take a while when he gets back before he can meditate on his experiences without that meditation being harmful. So, for example, there's pretty good evidence if you've had a traumatic experience that you shouldn't re-subject yourself to the traumatic experience repeatedly before, say, about 18 months or something like that is passed. And it isn't exactly obvious why that's the case, but there's a pretty good literature indicating that it is. So I would say that when he makes the transition from Iraq back to normative society, that the first thing he should do is generate a plan, you know, a plan about how he would, and this would be the same even if you were coming out of something like prison or making a change, a radical change in your occupation, is you need a plan, right? You need a plan so that you can because you can't just make that adjustment without knowing what you're doing. So that's what I would recommend. And if he does come back traumatized, then I would say, you know, traumatized soldiers often have to develop a very comprehensive philosophy of good and evil, and so that would either mean perhaps talking to a decent clinical psychologist about what his experiences were, or perhaps reading some of the literature. And I've outlined those books on my website at jordanbpeterson.com that can be really helpful in understanding and helping someone understand the evils of atrocity and warfare, and even the necessary evils, let's say, of atrocity and warfare. So okay, let's see here. Do you think a lot of your work is the form of the bargaining stage of grief? No, I don't think that. There's these stages of grief that have been identified. I can't remember who did the work. It seems to have been quite helpful work for many people. But I don't think I'm bargaining. Exactly. I don't think I'm suggesting that people bargain. I think I'm suggesting that people work and sacrifice. And you could think about that as bargaining, but bargaining has the connotation more of pleading, let's say. And I don't think that work and sacrifice constitute pleading. I think that they're actually really effective means of dealing with the world. And I think that people can be highly effective and competent, much more than they think. And so It's an interesting question, and I can see why you posed it, but no, I don't believe it. So, could you comment on the Buddhist concept of impermanence and the finite nature of reality being what gives it meaning? Oh yeah, that's a good one. And how that concept conflicts with ideas of eternal life in heaven. Jesus, man, that's a lot of questions. That's a lot of hard questions. Well, let's start with... I'm going to only answer one of those, I think. It's just too much effort to get all three of them in the same... It's like hitting 3 fastballs with the same swing of the bat. I don't think I can manage it. How does the finite nature of reality give it meaning? How is it that the finite nature of reality is what gives it meaning? God, that's such a good question. Well, I can answer this obliquely. I'm going to talk about something that happened to the comic book character Superman in the late 70s. So Superman was extraordinarily popular from the 1930s right up to the 1970s. But one of the things that happened is that as he became more and more popular, he also got more and more powerful, right? So by the 80s, Christ, you know, you could bounce a hydrogen bomb off Superman's chest and he could juggle planets, and you know, that's all well and good, except what kind of adventure is he going to have, right? Like, you know, if you can't blow him up with a hydrogen bomb and he can juggle planets, nothing interesting can happen to him. He can be anywhere he wants at any time, and he can do anything he wants with no effort under any circumstances whatsoever. So he's like a permanent deus ex machina. I think I've got that right, which is Superman is boring because God always comes in at this last moment and saves him from whatever predicament he's in. Well, you know, contemplating that, perversely enough, can give you some appreciation for the finitude of life. It's like we're like infinity captured in the finite, like a genie encapsulated in the lamp, you know, and genie is the root word of genius, by the way, so that's not an accidental comparison. And it's this strange combination of infinite capacity that characterizes human beings to some degree, with this terrible finite limitation that does in fact make our lives the adventures that they are. And so this is quite nicely documented in the Tao Te Ching, by the way, and I would really recommend the translation by Seth Rosenthal. I really think it's elegant, and the Taoists are very good at formulating the utility of non-existence. In fact, I think there's actually a verse in the Tao Te Ching called the utility of non-existence, where they talk about the empty space in a pot, giving it its utility, and so that's what the pot isn't, in some sense, that makes it what it is. And that's also the case with human beings, is that we have these intense limitations that we can then attempt to transcend, and that it's meaningful to transcend those limitations in such an interesting way. And I don't know what that means in the final metaphysical analysis, but you see that we do this voluntarily to ourselves too, because bored people will place restrictions on themselves just for entertainment. That's exactly what we do when we play a game. So for example, if you're playing chess, you subject yourself to all sorts of arbitrary limitations, right? There's only a certain number of things you can do with the chessboard and the chessmen. And then you open up a whole universe of possibilities by adopting those limitations. And there's something about that that speaks deeply to the absolute nature of reality, and maybe justifies the tragic finitude of being. It's something like that. And that's how it looks to me. And I've thought about that quite deeply. So, can an introvert thrive in the field of law, or should they avoid it altogether? Yes, actually, we gathered a lot of data on lawyers, and extroversion. It doesn't predict law, what would you say, proficiency at law at all. It's not associated with it at all. What predicts proficiency in law is intelligence and conscientiousness. And then after that, relatively low agreeableness, because it's a very competitive enterprise, high emotional stability, so low neuroticism. But introverted lawyers do fine. Now, if you're an introverted lawyer, there's going to be some challenges, and those challenges would be developing the social skills necessary, say, to stand up in the courtroom if you happen to be a lawyer who's going to do courtroom work. But there's plenty of like solitary work that a lawyer can engage in. But then the other problem might be, for an introverted lawyer, that, you know, you want to develop your web of connections, your social network, and of course you want to do that in any enterprise, right? So it's a challenge for introverts in general. But I would say there's absolutely no reason whatsoever to assume that law is a discipline that an introvert should avoid. So, you know, go for it. But you need to be conscientious, right? Because it really matters if you're conscientious as a lawyer, and you should have a pretty decent verbal intelligence, because otherwise it's going to be a hard road. Because lawyers have to deal with an awful lot of verbal material, and they have to formulate complex arguments. They have to be able to write and communicate. And so, you know, you want to think about those elements of your temperament more, I would say. Okay. Dr. Peterson, do you believe the evidence for God lies primarily in interpersonal experiences? Well, it lies to a great degree in interpersonal experiences, although I don't even know if you could call that necessarily evidence for God. It depends on what you're willing to accept as evidence. Like even that experience that I had, that I described earlier in the Q&A, isn't evidence for the existence of God. You know, it was certainly a religious experience, and I found it extremely compelling, but from a scientific perspective, it's almost worthless as evidence because it's purely subjective. Now, I think there are elements of experience that cannot be got at objectively, and so I'm willing to take subjective experience under some circumstances as evidence, insofar as if I have a subjective experience that I find credible, I'm willing to act on what I believe to be its meaning. And so I'll test out my interpretation of that experience pragmatically. And that's good enough for me. I'm willing to consider that evidence, but you can't really consider that scientific evidence. So, but then what other evidence is there? Well, there's also, let's call it the evidence that's instantiated in the great religious texts of mankind, the great philosophical texts and the great literary texts as well. And I wouldn't exactly call that subjective experience, because you can garner it through your exposure to culture, but you know, whether or not that constitutes evidence depends on what you're willing to define as and accept as evidence. So I'm told that my overanalyzing is a double-edged sword, but I'm suffering from being this way. Yeah, well, you're probably, you know, high in openness, and maybe you're very verbally intelligent, so you're pretty much stuck with that. Maybe you've got a bit of mania to you too, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I find relief when I drink alcohol, smoke, or take certain drugs because it slows down my thought process. How can I use my overanalysis to my advantage? Well, I would say find yourself a difficult cognitive problem to solve. You know, pick a challenge, But, you know, you also might consider talking to someone. You find relief when you drink alcohol. That might be an indication that some of what you're overanalyzing isn't so much a consequence of excess cognitive power, but an excess of high negative emotion. And so that would be illustrated in, say, high trait neuroticism. We're going to release the Big 5 aspect scale here later this month, and you'll be able to take that, and it'll give you a pretty good detailed description of your personality. And there's 2 dimensions of neuroticism, withdrawal and volatility. And you know, if you're overanalyzing because you're what do you call that? Ruminating, that can be a consequence of high levels of anxiety. And the reason I'm suggesting that is because you said you find relief when you drink alcohol, and alcohol is a very powerful anxiolytic agent, anti-anxiety agent. And so lots of people who have high levels of anxiety do ruminate, and so overanalyze, let's say, and they find relief when they drink because alcohol is a primary anxiolytic, like Valium, like benzodiazepines and barbiturates. So the fact that alcohol gives you relief probably indicates that some of what's driving your overanalysis is anxiety. And then you could, exercise can really help with that. I would also recommend, this is something really to think about, I don't know what your eating habits are like or your sleeping habits, but if you are an anxious person and that's manifesting itself in, say, neurotic overanalysis, there's 2 things you can do very rapidly, 3 things really, that will help quell that. Well, 4 things even. Number 1, get up at the same time every day. And I would recommend in the morning, because that's when people generally get up, and it's good to do what everyone else does unless you have a good reason not to. Number 2, eat a large breakfast, right? Keep it carbohydrate light. You know, don't eat toast and like and Fruit Loops. That's not going to do the trick. Make it fat and protein heavy, and eat more than you want. You might say, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, this has nothing to do with what you want or what your appetite is. It's like, you need to eat in the morning. If you're an anxious person and you don't eat in the morning and then you stress yourself out, your body hyperproduces insulin. It takes all the blood sugar out of your blood, and that dysregulates your metabolism for the entire day. You can't reset it till you go to sleep at night. And I've had lots of anxious clients who would say fall into the overanalytic category, who were like virtually cured by eating a large breakfast every morning. I would highly recommend that. You could try some physical exercise. Weightlifting is really good for curing anxiety. Another thing you could do, as I alluded to earlier today, is to make a schedule and start attending to your daily micro routines. So, you know, you got to figure out what your overanalysis is. It might be cognitive, like maybe you have a very active mind, you know, you're fast verbally. Are you fast verbally? One way you can find that out is to do something like write down as many words as you can that begin with the letter S, for example, in 3 minutes. Do that with a bunch of your friends. And if you're someone who writes down way more words than anyone else, then you're verbally fluent, and that might be driving some of your overanalysis. But my guess is that you're suffering from some rumination that's related to anxiety. And so I told you what I think the simplest ways are to rectify that. So I hope that works out for you. Let's see, what else have we got here? Okay. Almada Warrior says, can you answer this question, Dr. Peterson? And the answer is, I can, but I'm not going to. Okay, let's see. Loki Doodle says, I cleaned my room finally. That's good. I hope that it has a pronounced positive effect on the rest of your life. You know, it's funny because since last September, I would say, I redid my house. I'm going to put a video online about that because I had a camera crew in here this week videoing the whole house because it's quite interesting, I would say. But since I've stepped into this chaotic domain last September, my room has been a mess. The rest of the house hasn't been too bad, but I've never got to cleaning my room. I finally did this weekend. And what was interesting, because when I did it, I mean, I've been doing a lot of other things, but that's that doesn't help keep at bay the negative psychological consequences of being in material chaos. When I cleaned my room this weekend, it made it easier for me to finish this chapter that I've been obsessing about. So that was quite interesting. So, you know, cleaning and organizing your room is no joke. It's a great meditative exercise, especially if you take it seriously. And you're not trying to make it look neat, although that's not a bad aim. You're trying to turn the room into somewhere that the person you want to be could live. So what do I believe that there's any connection between leftist identity politics of past decades and the emergent white identity politics of the alt-right? Yes, I think there's a direct causal connection. It only stands to reason that if identity politics is going to be the acceptable mode of communication, that there are people who are on the white side of the equation, let's say, who are going to decide that they're going to play exactly the same game, clearly, obviously, and horribly, you know, because I'm no fan of identity politics, but what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. So, but I would recommend that people don't do it because, you know, the radical leftists and their damn identity politics that's unbelievably pathological. And if you decide to fight that by playing the same game, you think, well, I'll play the same game and then I'll win. It's like, you know, you won't, because by playing the game, you lose. That's the thing about your political opponents, is you don't play their damn game. You play a different game. And so, you know, what I've been trying to encourage people to do is, instead of playing the collectivist game, and that would include alt-right identity politics, say, is to play the individualist game and to get their act together. The best revenge, I would say, but you shouldn't be doing it for revenge, but the best revenge against the collectivist leftists is to live a stalwart, meaningful, and high-quality individual life. And that's also the pathway that requires the most responsibility and sacrifice, and so I think is the most honorable and least self-deceptive. So What is your view on the book/movie Fight Club? I thought Fight Club was deeply fascist in a very interesting way. I mean, I'm saying that in some way dismissively, although I actually liked the movie. I also think it was fascist because it was a celebration in some sense of force. It was fascist sort of in the same way that the Iron Man character is fascist, you know. But I also thought it was a really interesting exploration of the idea of developing the shadow. And I do believe that if men don't become consciously dangerous, they become unconsciously dangerous. And so it's much better to become consciously dangerous. And it's something that every man should really aim at. So you should be someone that no one will mess with. But then you should keep that under control, right? You should be, first of all, you should be harmless and naive. Then you're a child. Then you should develop your capacity to be dangerous. Then you should bring that capacity to be dangerous under control. Then that makes you a man, as far as I'm concerned. So Jared Chan says, I just wanted to thank you very much. Love you heaps, man. LOL. I'm slowly reading all of Jung's books thanks to you. Well, you have to read them slowly, man. There's no way you can read those fast. Like, watch out for yourself, because those things play vicious games with your mind. So, praying for you. Well, good. I could use some prayer, man. So, thanks, Jared. Much appreciated. So, good luck with the reading. And, you know, make sure you're doing something practical and easy at the same time, because Jung, he's hard on person. That's for sure. If you really want to twist your head in a knot, you could do some reading. You could read some Nietzsche at the same time. It's a nice adjunct. Though Jung wrote some books on Nietzsche, like his commentaries on Thus Spake Zarathustra. So, yeah, good to hear from you. Thanks very much, man. So, let's see. Whoa. Still haven't quite mastered this live chat thing. It zooms around quite a bit. Hey, when was that high school student program you were coming out with happening? Oh, that's the future authoring, the self-authoring program for high school students. Man, we're trying to get that out within a month. But I can't say for sure because it's a software development program. But we're aiming at the fall, that's for sure. So, and we're hoping it'll be a killer like the university self-authoring program was, you know. For those of you who don't know, you probably all know because you're Patreon subscribers, but the future authoring program seems to improve the performance of college students by about 25%. We're hoping with the high school students to, you know, have the same impact at a much earlier age, and to teach kids to define themselves voluntarily and to start charting their destiny. That would be a lovely thing. And we're going to sell directly to the high school students instead of trying to go into schools and so forth, which I think would be just an exercise in frustration and utility. I should say that, and I don't know how this got set up, I probably pushed some button that I didn't even notice, is that some of you seem to be donating money, and the money is associated with questions. And I've clicked on some of those, and I'm not sure what to make of that exactly, because I don't know how it happened exactly, and I want to make sure that I get questions from everyone as much as I can. So if I miss you, I hope that you're not donating unless I actually click on your question. So, but if that isn't the case, then I apologize. I'm trying to keep up with as many questions as I possibly can. Thoughts on the Jews? Well, the first thing I could say about Jews is that a lot of my friends happen to be Jewish, and I think that's partly because Jewish people, and that's in part a cultural thing, are very, very interested in ideas, and I happen to be very interested in ideas, and so I have a great affinity for Jewish people, and so, and I think that Jewish people are overrepresented in positions of competence and authority, and that's often because they're extraordinarily competent. So, you know, hooray for them. That's how it looks to me. So, what do you have to say about girls who grow up without fathers? Be very careful in who you choose as a mate, because you don't have that much experience with what constitutes a good man. And so I would say be cautious, man. Be cautious. Look for someone who treats you well, and not because of weakness, you know, don't confuse being afraid to offend you with treating you well. Someone who treats you well is someone who's tough and forthright and self-reliant, but who is able to listen and to negotiate in particular and to tell you the truth. And so, and don't give yourself away too easily. And that's what I would say to girls, period, is don't give yourself away too easily. It's a big mistake. You'll regret it. You'll regret it. So I'm starting to slow down here. Nietzsche was pretty fun to read. Got all his works. Nino the Sinner. Well, that should really help you with your sinning there, Nino. So, yeah, Nietzsche, he's a trip, that's for sure. If you guys are thinking about reading Nietzsche, don't start with Thus Spake Zarathustra. You should read that last. I would start with Beyond Good and Evil. And fun is a pretty weird way to describe it, though. Read Dostoevsky, too. That'd be good for you. What advice would you give to a person high in agreeableness and conscientiousness? Get a significant other who is left-leaning or one who is leaning towards radical leftism? I would say get a significant other. Don't get a significant other based on their political predispositions, you know. Get a significant other that you can trust and that you are attracted to and that you want to build a life with, and leave the political stuff for when it's necessary, because the political stuff should only be engaged in when it's necessary. Do you think Islam is compatible with the West? Not in any self-evident manner. So, although I would also say that Islam is part of the West, you know, we should actually give that some consideration. Do you mean, is Islam compatible with Christianity? I hope so, but it isn't obvious to me in what manner it's compatible with Christianity. We'll see. That doesn't mean that Muslims aren't compatible with Western society. You know, I mean, many Muslims are no more radical Muslims than Christians are radical Christians. In fact, many Muslims aren't any more Muslims than many Christians are Christians. And so, you know, I would say, generally speaking, across populations, people are pretty decent, and as individuals, you know, generally speaking. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the belief systems that they inhabit are commensurate. So, Alt Cap Right says, I think you should fortify your ideas on Christianity. I am doing my best to do exactly that. So, Dr. Peterson, what was your relationship like with your mother and father? It was and is pretty good. They're both still alive, thank God. I just went up and saw my dad for his 80th birthday. He's in good shape. I actually gave him a Kekistani flag as a joke, which he really appreciated. So I think he's got that flying up in his cabin way the hell up in northern Saskatchewan, which I think is pretty comical. I love my parents deeply. They've been a great source of support for me. My father, I had some struggles with my father when I was an adolescent, partly because I was depressed, and so was he. He was a great father when I was a young child. He spent so much time with me and paid so much attention to me and taught me to read. And like, I have nothing but great memories of him before grade 6. And then we had about 3 years that were rocky. Well, more than that, probably about 5 years that were rocky, which we both contributed to, and so did other circumstances. But I mean, since I moved away from home, which I did at 16, we've got along just fine, and I think we have an absolutely superb relationship, and they've been incredibly useful and supportive in the last year. So, and my mother is a wonderful person. She's a little too agreeable for her own good, but she's tough, and she had a, you know, she raised 3 kids, and she went out and had a career, and she's put up with my dad, who's a pretty tough, stubborn guy, and she's a lovely person. I love her deeply, and she's been very good to my kids, and I've had a good relationship with them, and I would say it's just got better and better as we've got older and straightened ourselves out. And I would say that about my whole family, including my sister and my brother and their family, and it's functioning pretty damn well, and so thank God for that, man. So I have a friend who's considering majoring in psychology. What advice would I give them? Stick to the biological end of it as much as possible, with the exception of the great clinical works, because they're very much worth reading. Master your damn statistics, because that'll open up career doors for you. Nail your grades. Go get a degree in clinical psychology. A PhD in clinical psychology is so valuable that it's almost incomprehensible. So that's what I would say. And learn to analyze the research reports and pay attention, and it can be an absolutely great career. All right, guys, it's been a long day. I spent most of today writing my chapter 7 of my new book called 12 Rules for Life, which is an absolutely deadly chapter. It's just about killed me. I have gone over today, I went over every word and every sentence and rewrote them, and it's a chapter on sacrifice and work and the battle between good and evil in Christianity, and the nature of a meaningful life. And it's been hard, and I'm tired, and although this has been great fun, and I would like to say in closing once again, thank you very much for the support and for all of the, I mean, I'm absolutely overwhelmed by the positive response my work has got over the last year. It's been very, I've been amazingly well compensated both financially and psychologically for my efforts, which I'm thrilled about, and I hope that I can keep delivering to you what it is that you seem to be, what would you say? I hope that I can continue to deliver whatever it is that I've been delivering in the past that all of you have been finding of value. I am doing my best to do that. I think it's the right way forward out of this bloody, chaotic political mess that we're in. And I mean, I've been thinking about that for years, you know, that the way out of the ideological morass is the strengthening and fortification of the individual. And I hope you all participate in that, because it's, it's a cliche, but I'm getting tired, so it's the best I can do. There's no limits to what a person who decides to put themselves together can do. And so I would very much encourage all of you to aim at that, because what the hell else have you got to do in this like veil of tears, this tragic veil of tears, but put yourself together and prevail. And so on that note, man, over and out, and I'll talk to you all in a month.